For this video, I want to look at a couple of resilient skills that are outside of the garden. The first is using some woodcraft skills to make a grade stake out of a sapling that we had in the yard. And the second is using a solar oven to bake bread. I'm pounding my woodcraft knife into this stump so that I can use it as a simple plane to shave the bark off of these young trees. I need some grade stakes to plant some honeyberries, but unfortunately we just ran out of grade stakes, and so I'm going to use what would be called a bushcraft or a woodcraft skill here to make some simple grade stakes. Personally, I prefer the term woodcraft to bushcraft because I do not in fact live in the bush. The technique I'm using here is basically I'm holding the top of the knife and pulling backwards with the sapling here, and I'm pushing really hard on my upper hand, and I'm pulling really hard on my lower hand, and I can shave off quite a bit of bark, and you can actually also even get small knots out of the wood as well, although they take quite a bit more effort. And as long as I just keep rotating 90 degrees on each side, I get a somewhat square product at the end, although it is certainly not going to be anything like what you would get at a lumberyard. A couple of important points here. One is you really want to make sure that you are using the right knife for this. You don't want to try this with a Swiss Army knife, a Leatherman tool, any kind of folding knife at all, actually. You really want a knife that has a fixed blade, and you want it to be a fairly sturdy fixed blade. A kitchen knife probably wouldn't be the right thing here. The knife that I'm using is 3/16 of an inch thick carbon steel, which is pretty thick for a blade of that size. So as I'm doing this, I'm creating a lot of bark shavings, which are really useful to save if you do a lot of campfires, because once those have dried out a little bit, they are great as tinder. You are not limited to a square reduction as well. You can certainly do a round reduction by making much smaller turns each time you move to a different part of the wood. So there's really a lot you could do with this. This is also a much safer technique because the blade is fixed firmly in the stump. It's pretty easy to keep your fingers away from it, and I can't really think of too many techniques where you can put that much power onto a blade without also, risking potentially injuring yourself or somebody else. So it's one of my favorite woodcraft techniques to use. So the technique I'm using with my arm when I'm doing this, it reminds me a lot of trying to pull start a gas lawnmower. You really just want to kind of let it rip when you pull. And then just with your hand that's on the top of the knife, I tend to try to just hold it relatively straight and just sort of resist any motion back towards you, because the blade will, depending on what kind of a stump you have and how old it is, it may well try to move back towards you, so that handle will kind of be moving almost like a light switch inside the stump if you are not holding it. And you can kind of see it shaking there, but as long as you've got a good hand on that, it's not going anywhere. One thing I will say I don't like about this technique is that it is pretty exhausting when you're doing it outside on a hot, humid summer day in Maine. It's not the prettiest grade steak you've ever seen, but we've stripped off the majority of the bark, and it will do. Taking off the bark is going to prevent it from retaining moisture under the bark, which will greatly speed up the degradation of the steak. We are using a solar oven that was given to us through our local gift economy, and we're baking some bread. As you can see, it is coming along nicely. The temperature is actually only 250, but we have had pretty good luck with baking flatbreads around that temperature, so we are hoping that if we leave it long enough, we will cook this bread all the way through. And one of the benefits of a solar oven is it's really hard to burn your stuff because the air inside it stays so humid because it is sealed. One of the challenges with the solar oven is, of course, your weather. I have gotten this thing up to 350 before, but the time of day, clouds, and of course also time of year all factor into what kind of heat you're going to get, and you have to align it as well, and you have to kind of stay on top of that every 20 minutes or half hour perhaps, unless you're maybe in the desert or something like that where you just get so much solar energy that you almost can't avoid cooking with it. So this is the solar bread that we baked in our solar oven while we were putting in the honey berries. It has a really nice looking crust. The crust is not at all burnt, but it did brown some, and it's got a good hollow sound when you thump on the loaf, so I'm very optimistic about this.